Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. My name is Michael Millerman, MillermanSchool.com. And in this video, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the Millerman School is and what it does. So if you follow this channel at all, you know that sometimes I do live stream article readings on contemporary events. And when we go over those articles, I try to point out to you what Plato thought or Nietzsche thought or Aristotle thought or some other author thought about the topic that we're discussing. And in addition to the live stream article readings, we also have videos, for example, that go into a lot of detail on a specific thinker, like Martin Heidegger. I have several videos on Heidegger on this channel, or Leo Strauss, even Derrida. But behind the scenes of all of that, both the commentary on contemporary events and the study of serious thinkers, is this Millerman School project. So I think it'd be helpful if you knew something about that. Now, the Millerman School started under the following situation. I was a student at the University of Toronto doing my PhD. I graduated, I wrote a dissertation on the philosophy of Martin Heidegger and how it influenced various schools of political theory. But I didn't go immediately into academic employment. I did something else. And while I was doing that something else, I was teaching people privately as a private tutor. They would come to me to study Leo Strauss, for instance, or some other author in philosophy. And I was doing that privately, and then gradually decided to take those private tutoring sessions and my notes from them and make them video lecture courses where instead of just reaching one person, which you should know I still do private tutoring. I still do work one-on-one with people, but it was my first attempt to scale it through video courses. And that just worked out well. There was a demand for video lecture courses on the authors who were interesting to me. So gradually I put together a curriculum of video lecture courses in the history of political philosophy, where people can now purchase the course and take a book. For example, Plato's Laws. If you watched my previous videos, I just finished a course on Plato's Laws. Take a book like Plato's Laws, and I have a video lecture course that is a cover-to-cover exposition of the book. And so I now want to take a minute to tell you which books I teach and why I teach them the way that I do. I mean, Plato's Republic, for instance, I teach. Martin Heidegger's Being and Time. Plato's Laws. In some cases, these are long books, 300 pages, 400 pages. And I know that there are people sometimes who want a quick summary. Give me the too long didn't read. Give me the bottom line. What's this about? Maybe I can ask ChatGPT. Why do I need a Millerman School course that can be maybe 20 hours long to walk me through a book that's 400 pages? What's all of this intellectual investment and effort about? So let's start, in a sense, from the beginning. The courses that I offer are in foundational political philosophy, classical, and contemporary. What does that mean? Well, foundational. Plato's Republic is pretty much the definition of foundational. Anybody in the history of Western philosophy, and not only Western philosophy, refers back to Plato in some way when they think about the soul, when they think about justice, they think about politics, when they think about pretty much anything, they have to be responding to Plato. It's just a fact. It's what happens. So Nietzsche, you may be a young man who's really attracted by Nietzsche's master morality and his opposition to slave morality. Well, the more you get into Nietzsche, the more you're going to see how important his relationship is to Plato, how important his attitude is towards Socrates. So in order to make sense of things that come later, it's very helpful to have a solid foundation in the things that came first. Now, the school does not cover everything that came first in its current curriculum. So I don't have courses on Homer, for instance. I don't have courses on the Bible, whereas Homer and the Bible are also foundational. But in the realm of the history of political philosophy, Plato is really the cornerstone. And therefore, there are currently 12 dialogues of Plato's that are represented in the school. The Republic, the Laws, and then all together in one course, there's a course based on a book called The Roots of Political Philosophy, 10 Forgotten Socratic Dialogues, which is 10 shorter dialogues, plus commentaries on them. Okay, so that gives you 12 courses on Plato currently in the school. Now let me pause for a minute and say something about this commentaries component, because I told you The Roots of Political Philosophy has the 10 dialogues plus commentaries. And that's an important component of what I try to offer at the Millerman School, is to bring in the voice of the commentators to help us to understand the books. Now, which commentators? Many people have written about Plato's Republic. Many people have written about some other dialogues, but the Millerman School is really focused on one specific school of commentators. Not that the other ones don't matter, not that you can't learn something from everybody, but in my view, the school of commentators, which includes and is built around Leo Strauss, the great Leo Strauss, who was for many, many years in American higher education, the leading interpreter, I would say, the leading commentator on the history of political philosophy, and who has a school that in some sense followed him, his students, many of whom became translators of the Platonic dialogue. So for instance, Alan Bloom, who translated the Republic, studied with Leo Strauss. Thomas Pangel, who studied Plato's Laws, who translated Plato's Laws, studied with Leo Strauss. Okay, so they had a specific approach to understanding Plato, and they thought that previous commentators had missed the mark. So as often as possible, when I teach a book in the school that Strauss or his students have commented on, I try to include as part of the video exposition to give you a deeper appreciation for the book, just like that's how I developed deeper appreciation for these books. I include the commentaries of Strauss and his students. So in the Plato's Republic course, that tends to be Alan Bloom. In some courses, I'm not really all the time talking about the commentator, but everything that I've learned from Strauss and his students informs how I talk about these books most of the time. Okay, so that gives you Plato and the world of Plato, the commentaries that I use to help do the exposition of these books. And then continuing with the theme of foundations in classical political philosophy, after Plato, there's Aristotle, Aristotle's Politics, another foundational book. For a very long time, Aristotle was known just as the philosopher. He was authoritative for everybody else in the Middle Ages and so on. So I don't cover everything Aristotle's ever written, and there's other works by Aristotle that are also important and that eventually will become a part of the curriculum. But right now it's his Politics. That's the name of the book. So you can go from studying Plato to studying Aristotle, and you're sort of moving forward in the history of political philosophy. Now, I have to tell you this because it's very important. Even though I keep saying these are books in the history of political philosophy, I don't teach them primarily as historical artifacts. We read these books not just to see their place in the history of a sequence of thoughts, but to learn about the essence of the subject matter. So in the course on Plato and the course on Aristotle and the other courses to come and the other existing courses in the school, it's never just a matter of a historical overview. In fact, I would say, if anything, the historical significance, where you might think like, I want to know less the substantive details of what he thought and more like how he fits into a story, that's dialed down in the school. Because I think that you get that approach in other places sort of more prominently. What's dialed up in the school is, what did he teach? What did he say? What did he think? What did he argue? What's the evidence? How does this contribute to our understanding of the issues that we care about? Issues of contemporary politics, issues of human spirituality and satisfaction, and the human condition, issues concerning God and whether we should believe and why we should believe and how we should believe. So whatever they regard as the substantive issues is what I try to bring out in the commentary, as opposed to just saying, here are the historical details and the sort of biography and so on. One of the thinkers I teach in the school, Alexander Dugin, he's a contemporary Russian thinker. I'm going to say something about why I teach him and who else I teach who fits into his mold, but he has said about himself that his bibliography is his biography. In other words, if you want to know about him, you have to know his books. And you could say that that's how I teach every author in the school, that if you want to know about them, you have to know their books. That's what matters most. So if you're interested in their sex lives or you're interested in something else about them, I'm not exactly sure these video lecture courses are going to be the most helpful way to get that information. But if you want to know what they thought, what they wrote, what they argued, why they saw the world the way they did on their own terms, then for sure, I think these courses are going to be helpful. Okay, so let's take the case of Dugin now for a minute. Well, one of the ways that I developed some notoriety or some popularity in certain circles is that for many years, I was translating Alexander Dugin's books from Russian into English. Dugin is, among many other things, okay, some people like him, some people don't. He's a living pro-Russian thinker, and so people who don't like Russia don't necessarily like that. Okay, there are a lot of reasons why people may have some opposition to him, but he is part of the great conversation of political theory and political philosophy. He has a criticism of contemporary political liberalism, okay, however construed, globalism, the Great Reset, the woke world, okay, American unipolarity. He has an analysis of all of that, an analysis of what it means to be postmodern, and an attempt to respond to it using resources from the history of philosophy, both Plato and Heidegger, a figure I'm going to have to talk more about in a second. So Dugin is a theorist, and I think he's a serious theorist, whatever else you may have to, whatever other opinions you might have about him. So I teach a couple of books by him in the school. And to repeat, I think that, one of the distinguishing features of the Millerman School is that I happen to have been his translator for a long time out of personal interest. And therefore, I'm able to take his teaching seriously enough, I think, to put it into dialogue with the other better recognized and obviously well-established great names in the history of political philosophy. But one of the reasons I teach Dugin is because besides foundations in classical thought, I think we do need the contemporary side of things too. And that means criticisms of modernity, criticisms of, as I said, contemporary liberalism. And Dugin falls into that category, partly. He's not the only one. So Carl Schmitt, many of you may know Carl Schmitt, the concept of the political. Carl Schmitt, a well-known Nazi jurist who had very profound criticisms and analyses of liberalism and other issues, also wrote books on political theology. I teach Carl Schmitt in the school. I also have videos on YouTube about him. And the book I teach is called Legality and Legitimacy. Okay. And this book on the themes of legitimacy and legality, they connect with the other themes. So one of the things you're going to notice is all of the authors I teach and all of the books I teach, they form a certain kind of circle. They're all in a conversation, not necessarily directly. They don't always explicitly address one another, but they're dealing with topics that they all have an interest in. What's the nature of legitimacy? What's the source of sovereignty? What makes a law good or just? Plato asks that question. Carl Schmitt asks that question. Plato does it in the form of dialogues. Schmitt does it through an analysis of the failures of the Weimar Constitution. But it's a similar kind of inquiry, and we learn something by studying both thinkers. So I teach Carl Schmitt. There's another person you may not have heard of. He's less well known, and there are probably good reasons why people don't mention him. His name is Arthur Moyler Vandenbroek. And in the 1920s, he wrote a book called The Third Reich. Okay, Germany's Third Reich. This is not a historical book about the Nazi regime. In fact, it predates the rise of the Nazis. And my understanding is that Hitler took the term the Third Reich from Vandenbroek, who incidentally was also a translator into German of the novels of Dostoevsky. And so I teach Vandenbroek's book because it does something that, in my opinion, is valuable for students of political theory and political philosophy. It conceptually distinguishes between a variety of ideological tendencies: liberalism, socialism, reactionary thought, monarchism, conservatism, revolutionary thought, progressivism. Okay, it has chapters that are named like that. So here's the chapter on reactionaries, here's the chapter on progressives, here's the chapter on liberals, here's the chapter on conservatives. And it's just a clear statement, to my mind, that helps us to disambiguate some things that sometimes we lump together. Another important point in the school: I never really liked it when people lump all right-wing thought under the name fascism and then call fascism something bad. And that equation excuses them from ever taking right-wing political theory seriously. Because why would I have to? If it's all fascist and fascism is all bad, then the moral thing to do is not even to go there. Just reject it all. But it's not so straightforward. If you've watched this channel at all, and if you haven't, I'll tell you that in my view, there's a lot on the right, broadly construed, that is valuable, that is not fascist. And then there's the independent study of fascism as a phenomenon. Do we even understand that well enough to have more than just a knee-jerk moral reaction to it? So it's very important to me. That's another principle of the school. Okay, I guess I'll share it like this. I discovered this when I was a master's student and later a PhD student in political theory. It's that the broad spectrum of political thought, let's simplify it for a minute, just call it liberal, left, and right. I realize that that's a simplification, but let's just simplify it like that. What I recognized was there's a study of the liberal center. Okay, people will read Mill. Sometimes you might say, well, we don't even read enough liberal thinkers, but still, it's represented in the curriculum. And left-wing anti-liberalism for sure is represented in the curriculum. There are whole departments, whole schools, okay, whole disciplines that basically are ideologically aligned with left-wing anti-liberalism. But when it came to the tradition of right-wing anti-liberalism, there's just a gap. is less well studied, less well understood, too much caught up in the bad reputation of Nazism and fascism. And the many thinkers on the right were just taboo. And I've made it a matter of my personal interest, the project over the last many years, to try to bring a thoughtful attitude towards the authors on the right that is not merely dismissive of them, but that's open to learning whatever there is to learn from them. That's just been important to me. Okay, I represented that in my dissertation, in my books, and in my YouTube videos, as well as in my Millerman School curriculum. So Arthur Moyler Vandenbroek, he fits there. Okay, so you have these contemporary figures, Carl Schmitt, Dugin, Vandenbroek, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, a Jewish thinker, an Orthodox Jewish thinker, a rabbi, who writes about the human condition in his book, The Lonely Man of Faith. It's one of the books I teach in the school. Again, some criticism of contemporary society, of modernity, in its over-exaggerated focus on technological accomplishment at the expense of human spirituality and human religiosity and inwardness. Soloveitchik, brilliant book, okay, very insightful, and it, again, connects with all of these questions. Now, another figure I mentioned, and I have to tell you because not only have I made so many videos about him on the YouTube channel, but I have several courses on him in the school, that's Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. Okay, Martin Heidegger. Why should Martin Heidegger be in the curriculum, and why should there be several courses by him? What's the big deal about Heidegger? Well, Heidegger was a 20th century philosopher, arguably the greatest philosopher of the time, and possibly the greatest philosopher of all time. So Heidegger occupies a very high rank, and he also occupies a very high rank in the opinion of everybody who came later, for the most part. Okay, the authors that I care about, everybody holds Heidegger in extremely high regard. Now, it's true to state a well-known fact that Heidegger was a member of the Nazi Party, and he was anti-Semitic at times, and he said other things and did other things that could be off-putting, and for some people is immediately disqualifying. But many brilliant Jews were attracted to Heidegger's work as well. It's something I've written about and talked about before, okay? And there are books on this. Heidegger's Children, I think, is one that mentions several of his Jewish students. I think there's a book called Heidegger's Jewish Followers, off the top of my head. Okay, there's a book on Heidegger and the Kabbalah, mystical tradition of Jewish theology. So, like it or not, Heidegger was both extremely highly regarded by the philosophers of his time, and despite his Nazism, read, in some cases loved, but certainly interpreted by many Jews, including the most outstanding Jewish thinkers of the last 100 years. Okay, so Heidegger clearly deserves a place at the table, not to mention his influence across so many other fields, but for our purposes, for sure, within philosophy and political philosophy, he's just exerted a huge influence. But he's not always studied in the context of these other thinkers and completely. So what does it mean to study him completely? I have a course on being and time, cover to cover exposition, not picking and choosing. Here's Heidegger on being towards death. Here's Heidegger on anxiety. Yes, there's something that's valuable if you just know those things in isolation, but it doesn't compare to what it means to know them in the context of his whole argument, his whole project. You need to know the questions that begin being in time, and you need to know where he ends being in time. And everything that comes in the middle is part of that journey. So it is a cover-to-cover exposition. And my hope is that when people take the Millerman School course on being in time, they read Being in Time from cover to cover. It's a difficult book, and Heidegger is notoriously unapproachable for some people. It's kind of like you have to be initiated into Heidegger to understand him. So these courses largely serve as an initiation into Heidegger to help you to understand him, get you on his wavelength, drive the point home, make it somehow comprehensible, and facilitate your study of Heidegger, allowing you to move through the books that matter in a way that you wouldn't have been able to do on your own. But Being in Time, despite its immense significance, is not the only book that Heidegger wrote. And I don't teach all of the 100 books or so that he wrote, but I teach another one that, in my opinion, in the opinion of my students, and in the opinion of my teachers, is of tremendous significance. And it's called Contributions to Philosophy of the Event. And it just adds something extremely significant to what you learn from Being in Time that you don't find in Being in Time, but that's necessary in order to understand what Heidegger's on about. And it's such an amazing book. I just finished teaching it in private tutoring, one-on-one. Okay, I have a student who wanted to go over it with me over a long period of time. privately with conversation on all of the relevant passages, but I also have the video lecture course on it that's designed to just introduce you to and get you through this incredible book, Martin Heidegger's Contributions to Philosophy of the Event. Two other things on Heidegger in the school. One is an introduction to Heidegger's thought through the Black Notebooks. So there was a scandal years ago when Heidegger's private notebooks were about to be published because they were thought to contain the most damning evidence of his anti-Semitism. In some cases, that's true. He says things there about Jews and the Jewish world conspiracy that doesn't say in Being and Time, for instance. But what I thought got lost in all of the controversy around the Black Notebooks, once I read them, is how insightful they are philosophically. And therefore, I made this course, Introduction to Heidegger's Thought Through the Black Notebooks, where there are some themes that he talks about, including Nazism, including Hitler, but including also his typical philosophical themes of metaphysics, ontology, and all of that, that I felt it was a nice vehicle for presenting you with Heidegger's philosophical and political thought through the first published volume of the Black Notebooks. Again, it's kind of introductory, but it's still substantive and serious and insightful. And the last component is Heidegger's interpretation of Plato's allegory of the cave. Now, you can buy that separately as Heidegger on the Essence of Truth, I think it's called, or Heidegger on Plato's Doctrine of Truth, but it's also included as a bonus mini course in the course on Plato's Republic, because it's topically, very related, right? You just finished a course on Plato's Republic. I also want to introduce you to Heidegger. The best way to do that, here's Heidegger's commentary on the cave allegory, which occurs in Plato's Republic. So that's, I think, why the course on Plato's Republic is a very special one. To me, it's the best-selling one in the school. I think it's the best introduction if you need a first place, because it introduces you to Plato and to Strauss, since I do a Straussian commentary on the Republic, and to Heidegger, since you have Heidegger's commentary on the Plato, on the allegory of the cave in Plato. So that's a really great place to start. In some cases, it's a great place to start and stop, although most of the people who take one of my courses end up doing more or all of them. So I've now explained to you what I teach in the school, a sort of broad scope. That's not everything. I have several courses on Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. They all fit into this general set of reflections. What is the nature of political life? What is the nature of human life? How do we understand contemporary situation? What happened in the transition from the classical to the modern world? What do intelligent people of past ages think about the topics that interest us, about men, women, their relationships, about the need for secrecy in government, the relationship of power to the concealment of information, politics and the arts. That's a big theme in Plato and Aristotle and Rousseau. So each thinker is contributing something extremely valuable to the set of fundamental questions. Otherwise, I wouldn't be teaching them. We're not teaching just anybody. We're teaching the most insightful thinkers who raise the most important questions concerning the affairs that I regard as, and that typically have been regarded as, fundamental. So a couple of courses on Rousseau, not on what you'd normally know if you studied Rousseau in a university or in some other compilation. Typically, you're going to study things like the social contract, this course on the arts and sciences, this course on inequality. And those are all important works. Needless to say, they should be studied. And at some point, perhaps I'll have courses on them in the school. But I took a slightly different approach. I teach a book of his that always left such an impression on me when I first read it. It's called Politics and the Arts. And it's Rousseau discussing the issue of whether Geneva should establish a theater. What effect on the way of life of the Genevans would the introduction of a theater have? And so that gets him into thinking about morality and the relationship of public entertainment to civic virtue. It's an incredible analysis. So that's what I teach. And then another book of his that's not very often studied, I would say, in broad survey type courses, it's Rousseau on the government of Poland. And he offers advice to Poland at the time that it's reconsidering its constitution. And in the course of giving that advice, we learn a lot about basic political order, and in particular, a perspective on basic political order that contrasts with our typical one. So we can learn from Rousseau about the Republican alternative to modern liberalism, the classical Republican alternative to modern liberalism. And of course, Rousseau also raises questions of law, national identity, education, and so on. So that gives you the span of authors, from Plato and Aristotle all the way up to Dugin and Heidegger, including in the middle some contemporary right-wing anti-liberals, some figures like Rousseau. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Orthodox Jewish thinker whose analysis is more rooted in the Bible than is the case in these other courses and other thinkers. So what's the school trying to accomplish with these courses? There are books that I want to introduce you to that you may never have studied or thought about, like Plato's Laws, Vandenbroek, okay, Soloveitchik. So in some cases, I want to introduce you to books, but I also want to introduce you to what it's like to read a book seriously. No offense, I'm not saying you never have, but one of the things that my great teacher Leo Strauss taught me, I didn't study with him in person, okay, but I read his books and I listened to his lectures, recordings of him teaching at the University of Chicago, and he's extremely important to me. One of the things I learned from Strauss is you can read a book and then you can read it with the help of an intelligent guide or commentator, and it's night and day. You know, you'll come out feeling like the first time you read it, you didn't see anything. Nothing. Everything was hidden. You misinterpreted everything. All of the mysteries passed you by. All of the secrets passed you by. Everything enticing, you know, so there's the fact that you've read something once, it's not a guarantee. I mean, reading is rereading. And one of the best ways that you can experience the benefits of rereading the first time you're reading is with the help of a great guide. And that's why all of these courses, they're not just designed to introduce you to books, authors, and ideas. They're also designed to foster a kind of habit of attentive and careful reading, get you onto a certain wavelength of understanding what it is to encounter a work of political philosophy seriously. Now, the last thing I'll say, I guess, is about Strauss. I do have 2 courses on Strauss in the school. So even though he's represented in several other courses, because I mention him or I draw on his commentaries or I discuss his students, there are separate courses on Strauss. There's an Introduction to Leo Strauss course, which is unique among the other courses in the school in that it's primarily essay-based as opposed to book-based. So Strauss wrote several smaller essays that I include here, and it gives you an introduction to the world of Leo Strauss's thought. That includes persecution and the art of writing. It includes the conflict between Athens and Jerusalem, the problem of reason and revelation, natural right and history. So there are a lot of key themes for understanding Leo Strauss that are presented in that course through the study of complete essays and in some cases key chapters of books of his. So that course is not primarily book-based, but it does give you a lot of first-hand essays that Strauss wrote that you can learn from and that I just super highly recommend. And then the other Strauss course is book-based. It's on Leo Strauss's book On Tyranny. It's in fact the first course that I ever had in the Millerman School. And that book On Tyranny includes Strauss's famous debate with Alexander Kojève concerning tyranny and wisdom. So Strauss, because he's a pillar of the school, obviously he's represented in its curriculum as well as in its methodology. The same is true of Heidegger. I would say Strauss and Heidegger are 2 of the pillars of the school. I do have a video on my channel, on my YouTube channel, called The 3 Pillars of Sense Making, where I say that for me, there are 3 things that you need kind of to use in order to triangulate as you search for meaning in this world. That's philosophy. It's kind of like pure philosophy. I put Heidegger kind of close into that bucket. There's politics or political philosophy. That's, you know, Plato writes about the Republic. He writes about the laws. He's more explicitly political than Heidegger. So I do think you need both, like metaphysics / ontology / first philosophy / pure philosophy, and politics, political philosophy, emphasis on law, on the regime, on constitutional order. That's crucial. You need them both. And one more category I have, which is not really represented, I would say, in the courses at the moment in the school, although it's there in my teaching and it's there in my commentary. And that's mysticism, or this idea that there's a deeper dimension, a hidden truth, something, how could you put it? Mysticism, okay? That's a broad category that includes many different things, but it is part of how I teach these books. So when I teach Nietzsche, of course, Nietzsche, okay, Plato, Aristotle, Heidegger, Dugin, Strauss, Schmidt, Nietzsche. I teach Nietzsche as Thus Spoke Zarathustra, cover to cover, okay, speech by speech. Zarathustra is a brilliant and amazing work, really rich. Obviously, I teach it with the benefit of a Straussian commentary. Lawrence Lampert, a great teacher, great Nietzsche scholar, wrote a commentary called Nietzsche's Teaching, which is a speech-by-speech walkthrough of Zarathustra that I relied on in my exposition. Okay, so one of the things you're going to see in Nietzsche's Zarathustra, there are moments that you have to call mystical. In Heidegger's contributions to philosophy of the event, there are moments that you have to call mystical. Not quite pure philosophy, they're definitely not political, but there's something. And I call that something mystical. So that's another thing you can understand about the school. The centerpiece or the focus is on political philosophy. But it includes sometimes more pure philosophy where the politics are slightly less evident, and sometimes this mystical dimension where it seems more religious than philosophical. That sometimes can creep into the exposition because I think it's there in the books. I try not to put my own, agenda across because I see myself as sharing what I regard as Strauss's agenda, which is to give students the opportunity to learn from these books by, as much as possible, bringing them to light as they are. How do you bring them to light as they are? Not by interpreting them through race and gender, not by interpreting them through their place in the history of things, understood in a kind of just merely, historical way, not by projecting too much onto them, but by trying to let them breathe. There's an imperative in a philosophical method called phenomenology, which is let the things show themselves as they are. So we try to see these books as they are. And what I learned from Strauss in a way is the way you do that is by reading them carefully. How do we know what mattered most to Plato? We don't until we read him carefully and try to make sense of it, piece it together. And Strauss made a very compelling case that political philosophy is the center of Plato's thought. So if you go, by the way, to millermanschool.com, there's going to be a pop-up, Dr. Millerman's Guide to Great Thinkers. It's really just an introduction to philosophy, to philosophical questioning, and then to a few philosophers. It's kind of introductory document, but one of the chapters or parts of that Guide to Great Thinkers, or that introduction to philosophy, concerns this point. It presents you with Strauss's arguments and Strauss's case at an introductory level for why you don't understand Plato if you don't understand the centrality of his political concerns, of the problem of political philosophy in Plato. I think a lot of people who discuss Plato talk about his epistemology or about his theory of ideas. They do not talk about political Platonism as the core of Plato's thought. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, but you're not ready to buy a course or something, go to the site, get the pop-up, Dr. Millerman's Guide to Great Thinkers, take it. You don't even have to read the whole thing, skip right to the section. I think it's lecture 2 on Strauss and introduction of the Straussian approach to Plato. So, okay, that's what the school is. Then I can tell you again, it's video lecture courses. So how does it work? I used to have subscriptions and so on. Now there's nothing. You pay once, the course is yours forever, as long as the internet exists. Okay. And you can watch it, you can rewatch it, you can watch it in a couple of years, you can have your kids watch it. Okay. Watch it with your wife, watch it with your friends, whatever. It's yours. Once you've bought it, it's yours. You can watch it. I think all of the courses have both video and audio. Some of them have additional notes as well. And you go through them. They are, as I said, expositions meant to guide you through the book. Some people watch the video lecture courses instead of reading the book. That's fine. You can do that. You're definitely going to get something out of it. I promise you'll learn and you're going to like what you learned and it's going to be good for you. Some people do the courses together with the books. That's probably even more valuable if you have the time and effort and interest to actually read the book at the same time as you're doing the video lectures. And as far as the order, I've heard everything. Some people read first, then do the videos. Some people watch the videos, then read. It doesn't really matter to me. I don't have a strong preference. Whatever works for you, try it one way, try it another way, and go from there. Besides the video lecture courses, I do offer private tutoring. All of that information is on the website, millermanschool.com. And I guess the last thing I'll say is this, that you can buy courses individually, which some people do. A lot of people, I told you, buy Plato's Republic, and then they decide to do something else or everything else. So that's fine. There are upgrade paths so that you don't have to pay twice. If you buy the Republic and then you want to buy the bundle that includes everything, I'll deduct what you paid for the Republic because there's no need to have to pay for it twice. So you can buy individual courses. I also have several bundles. I have something called the Core Course Bundle, which includes Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Dugin, Strauss, Introduction to Strauss, and a course I haven't mentioned called the Philosophical Analysis of Manliness, which basically studies pre-modern, modern, and postmodern thinkers on the question of who is man, and what is manliness. Okay, so that's a nice, also Strauss-inspired account of the history of political thought from pre-modern to postmodern. That's included in the Core Course Bundle. Then I have it's called a lifetime membership. Again, you pay once and all of the courses are yours forever. And that also gives you access, if you choose to have this, to 4 hours of private tutoring. So there's like the biggest thing you can buy is all the courses plus 4 hours of private tutoring. That's a lifetime membership. The next thing you could buy is all of the courses without the private tutoring. That's a little bit less expensive. It just doesn't include private tutoring. The next one down is the core course bundle that includes these 7 courses, which maybe I'll add to later, but that's what it is now. And then one step down from that is you just buy courses individually. Okay, so that's the Millerman School. That's what it offers at the moment. That's why it exists, the niche that it's trying to fill in some sense. I know there are other places. There's Peterson Academy. He teaches, I believe, Heidegger. He teaches Nietzsche. He teaches Plato. Okay, but he may not teach the Republic cover to cover with the benefit of a Straussian analysis, where you go into every question, every detail. You're not just trying to hit, some sort of high-level, free-form, speculating interpretation about it, but you really want to understand, what is this great book? Okay, same with Nietzsche. Maybe he teaches something about Nietzsche. I'm sure he does it and does it well, but it may not be a cover-to-cover study of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where you don't skip anything. You really get it completely as you can, as thoughtfully, insightfully, and memorably as you can. So there are other people teaching some of these authors, but I think I've presented you with what's distinct and hopefully, in your opinion, valuable about what I'm doing in my school. There's a free trial sort of thing where you can see lectures from the various courses. If you've watched my channel, you know who I am, how I teach, what I talk about. So you may already be predisposed to enjoy the video lecture courses if you like this channel. Well, thanks for giving me a chance to introduce you to what I'm doing in the school. I'll try to bring some of that content onto the YouTube channel here for you as we move forward, like some behind the scenes stuff, what I'm thinking about teaching next, maybe video clips from my private tutoring, just to give you a little bit more of an understanding of what's the activity of the school and what sort of things are we doing there, learning about there. It's pretty good. I mean, I can tell you that in private tutoring, I'm about to start teaching Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed. I don't have a course on it, but I will be doing it in private tutoring. There are several books like that I don't have courses on, but I have taught privately, like Agamben, Homo Sacer, for instance, a great book on sovereignty. So there are a lot of options for you if you'd like to study with me. Take a look at millermanschool.com. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. And otherwise, just stay tuned for more of our article, live stream readings, videos on great political philosophers, and now some insight behind the scenes about what's happening at the Millerman School. Guys, I really appreciate your time and attention. Take care. Be well. Goodbye.